So you go on in that video to talk about the Four Corners area being a hotbed of high strangeness. I interviewed in the past J.C. Johnson, a cryptozoologist who's now
Ah,
passed on, but he was highly focused on that area and all the weird sightings around there. Some people will say it's a hotbed for UFO activity. You mentioned that it's actually a major spot for methane emissions. So there's some natural stuff going on there, but you
right.
also get into the real history saying that the Anasazi Indians lived
Yeah.
there for centuries until they vanished without a trace between 1200 and 1300 AD. And then you have this kind of curious thing that you throw in that alchemist Fucanelli said that alchemists were able to build vertical accelerators, weapons of transmuting substances with incendiary effects.
Yeah.
And then you show towers and kind of talk about almost obelisks. Are you saying that there's some kind of energy weapon application to a tower like that? Is that what obelisks initially were? What do you think happened to these Native Americans that were in that area that mysteriously vanished, and why jump to the whole thing about towers and accelerators and fire?
Yes. Well, as Michael Hoffman mentioned, a lot of this was communicated to me through Jim Brandon, who is a dear friend, and I have learned quite a bit from him. And as he would, I think, put it, the Four Corners area is one of his enthusiasms, partly because of all the strangeness. And, he and I have had many discussions about the relationship of alchemy to some of these things in terms of the possibility of energy weapons, which in modern context is kind of floated sometimes under the label cold fusion. There's all kinds of other tie-ins to this, but yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there was a episode which In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy, got into the Siberian fireball explosion or the Tunguska explosion, which to this day is, still. I mean, it depends. Again, if you're a naturalist, you think it's not unexplained. It was an airburst meteor. End of story. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
if you're a little bit more if you're a little bit skeptical at all, I think you might think, well, that might resolve the issue. But I'm certainly not a scientist, so I can't resolve the issue in total. But yeah, the tie-in with alchemy is quite strange, and the idea there came through this enigmatic character Tal Levesque, who I guess he's long since departed the scene, and he mentioned, I think, that there could have been some kind of a thermonuclear style event that essentially, and I think what he's thinking is that the structures there remain. They were hardened in place to a certain extent, and the people, for all intents and purposes, just disappeared. So I think what Tal Levesque was trying to posit was an explanation that would account for why the structures were in place and the people seemingly were not. But of course, anthropologists might tend to say, well, they migrated, whoever the Anasazi were, they were simply interbred with or turned into the Hopi or the Navajo, and you know what I mean. Like, end of story. It's just that's the supposition. As Hoffman mentioned with respect to Downard, I would say we're not dogmatic about these kinds of claims. It's sort of just tossing them into the mix for consideration, partly because they do allow a person. I think so many of these events are useful because they can essentially be a jumping off point into further inquiry. So whether you think about the Four Corners as literally being resolved, the question of the Anasazi, by this speculation about thermonuclear energy that alchemists might have some kind of insight into, or whether or not you just say, I'm interested in the Four Corners, and then, oh, wow, I've never heard of this, the Siberian fireball. And now you're off and running in sort of, I guess my purpose in including some of that material is more to sort of expose people who might not be aware of the breadth of some of uh, the breadth of the strangeness that exists, really.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's the best explanation in this case, but it certainly is an intriguing one. It makes the imagination run wild for sure.
Right. And so this is also where it gets really interesting to me, because you talk about the Hopi being descendants of the Anasazi and the structure of their traditional kiva huts, always with a hole in the ground, which some
Yes.
say symbolizes the place for spirits to come out and bless their complex. But Others say it's a reference to the time that they went into the earth to avoid a cataclysmic time on the surface. Solar
Yes.
flares, solar radiation. I'm a big advocate for the cyclical cataclysmic model because I think it fits when you look at what the system tries to censor and tries to move us away from thinking in those kind of terms. I think it kind of fits. I mean, if you're thinking about your mortality and the limited time on the earth, whether it's on the micro scale of a human life or a civilization, you're not going to waste a lot of time going to your job and just making money for the parasite class. You know, you're going to
Right.
want more. You're going to have more ambitions. You're going to look for that deeper meaning to life. So to me, it kind of fits. So I'm always interested in this. I also love the inner earth stuff. I love the
Yeah.
underground material. And
Yeah.
so you talk about this possibility, and then you say that Jay Widener and Vincent Bridges wrote a book called The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Henday, Alchemy and the End of Time, that kind of ties in here. Apparently, there is a town called Henday in France, and there's a cross, an artifact
Hmm.
that contains a map to navigate the inner world and takes you through a route through Peru.
Right.
And this is how people fled the cosmic radiation. Now, if we're talking about a cataclysm, sure, there can be small things in one area, but we might be talking about something global or something that hits different parts of the globe at different times. And
Yeah.
our ancestors knew you go underground when this happens.
Right.
So we're not saying that the Hopi went through tunnels through Peru, but they do say these tunnels seem to connect everywhere underground. But
Yeah.
I had never heard of this particular book or this artifact, the Great Cross of Henday. Talk to us
Yeah.
about this a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you think, where did he come up with this in the first place? It just seems so niche. But to kind of make it a little bit more relevant, yeah, I thought it is a tie-in to some of the Hollow Earth mythos. And yeah, his point, if I remember correctly from that material, was that he thinks that our entire zodiac, I mean, this is a common claim that I mean, no matter what kind of view you take, that the zodiac somehow is a map to these kinds of ideas. And if I remember right, he talks about how Sagittarius, in his analysis, the arrow is pointed at the center of the universe as if it were a warning, to us, if we are able to interpret it right, that, hey, look in this direction. And essentially, it's got to do with the fact that the plane of wherever the Earth is, right, in the Milky Way, that somehow it almost wobbles with respect in a similar way as axial precession. The Earth sort of tilts, and wobbles on its axis. According to Widener and Bridges, the entire Milky Way kind of tilts with respect to the center of the universe, and they posit that somehow there are bursts of energy that can come, and maybe that always come from the center of the universe, and that the Earth is protected from that by being not on that plane. But as soon as, whatever it is, 26,000 years, or fill in the blank with some large amount of time, every so often the Earth gets a blast of this energy, and at that point, life as we know it is altered or comes to an end or something, and that anybody who wants to survive that has to go. That's their thesis. It's got a lot of literary interest, and this is back to the question of art and science. Louis L'Amour, in his Haunted Mesa, makes a lot of hay out of the kiva and the entrance of this kiva in this sort of mystical area of the Four Corners, that it accesses some kind of. I'm not so sure we could describe it as Hollow Earth, because he almost envisions it as a separate plane of existence, but it ties in to the Hollow Earth mythos in a number of ways. And if you look at authors, as I'm sure you're probably better aware than I, you're quite right that there are all these access points that they basically assert that in the center of the Earth they all come together. So maybe there's an access point beyond, underneath the paws of the Sphinx, right? I think I mentioned maybe that Edgar Casey kind of got into that, and I mean, just all over the place. I mean, maybe there's one, yeah, at the Four Corners. Tal Levesque, I think, was a fan of that idea.
Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2 hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes, and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right.
The Higherside Chat Show.